I was fresh out of high school and was working construction to earn money for college. I really did want to go to college and get into business, but my less than stellar academic scores in high school prevented me from getting any decent scholarship money. Mom and Dad were sympathetic, but unfortunately were struggling due to the poor economy, and it was all they could do to support themselves and my two younger siblings, a brother and a sister. They said they would help when and where they could, but I would have to bear the brunt of the financial burden for going to college. I lived in the Seattle area, which is good for the construction industry. We usually don't have really harsh winters, and that allows us to stay working year-round, unlike those out in the Midwest who have to stop for 4 months out of the year to wait for the snow to clear. It was just another rainy, blustery Seattle day when my brief career in construction came to a sudden end. We were framing a house, most of us using nail guns. Nail guns were a construction worker's friend. Using them, we could frame a house in a fraction of the time of using the old hammer and nail, and with much less manpower to boot. Used correctly, they were safe to use. If you ever held up a nail gun and just pulled the trigger, you would see it would not fire. Safeties are built into them to prevent them from firing unless pressed up against an object. And even then, we still treat them as guns and never stand downwind of one, just in case. So in a perfect world, my accident should never have happened. I remember very little, it happened so fast, but from my understanding it went down something like this. Mark was framing a door jamb. I was a good 10 feet to his left and well out of his way, or so I thought. Nail guns are operated pneumatically, and therefore need an air hose connected to them. What Mark did not know is that his air hose had gotten wedged in a corner. Not enough to cut off the airflow, but enough to remove any excess slack. So as Mark was nailing, he finally got to a point where he was just about to press down to drive another nail when he ran out of slack, causing the nail gun to twist in his hand. His downward motion still contacted the wood enough to allow the gun to fire, but because the gun twisted, the nail no longer sunk into the wood, but only glanced off of it and found open air. Its new trajectory had it flying just above the ground, and about 10 feet to his left. I was on my hands and knees doing some cleanup work. I heard a sound that just wasn't right. I looked up and was instantly knocked back. I took a framing nail dead center to my throat. I have been told if I hadn't looked up, my hard head would likely have deflected the nail. A half-inch to the left or right, and the nail would have hit a carotid artery, and I would likely have bled out before paramedics arrived. Either way, I was knocked unconscious by the shot, and don't remember anything else until I awoke in the hospital. When I did wake up, the first thing they told me was not to try to speak. First off, it would be painful, but some delicate work had been done to my throat, and the vibrations from speaking could have a negative impact on the repair work. No speaking for at least a week. I was told that the nail had damaged my voice box, but luckily did not destroy it. They had to remove some unsalvageable tissue, and reconstruct some more. They said the prognosis was good, that I would likely be able to speak normally again, but there always has to be a but, doesn't there? They said the repair work necessary had required my vocal cords to be shortened and tightened up. I was told I could expect my voice to go up in pitch just a bit. How much, only time would tell. I was permitted to go home 2 days later with my jaw wired shut, preventing me from trying to speak until I saw the doctor again. Until then, it was bed rest and a liquid diet. I'm normally a pretty active guy, but did as I was told. Workman's comp insurance paid for most of the doctor bills, but if I did something that would cause more corrective surgery, it would come out of my pocket, which neither I nor my parents had the money for. I watched TV, surfed the net, collected unemployment insurance, and went pretty much stir crazy for about a week and a half. Finally, the doctor was willing to have the wires removed from my jaw. Sitting in his office, he offered me some water, saying my throat would likely be a bit dry. After taking a few sips, he told me to try to say something. In a hoarse but squeaky voice, I asked him, "What do you want me to say?" He smiled and said that it was good that I was able to develop sound. He said that my vocal cords were weak from non-use, and that is why I was hoarse and squeaky. He told me he would send me home and not rewire my mouth shut, but to take it easy on the voice. Keep it to short words and sentences, he said. How long? I squeaked. He said that is the nice part of it. My body would tell me. If I overdid it, it would hurt. Sometimes pain is a good thing. He also said he understood my financial situation. He said in most cases, a voice coach is recommended to help retrain the voice, but it may not be covered by insurance. Once my voice was strong enough to talk normally, it might help if I joined a church choir or a singing group. Either way would be an excellent avenue for strengthening my vocal cords. Within a few days, the hoarseness did in fact go away, but the squeak did not. My voice sounded like a squeaky teenage girl. Contacting the doctor on the phone, he told me my voice was just finding its place and to wait it out. Taking the doctor's advice in another way, I talked to our church choir director and asked if I could join. He was concerned about my very squeaky voice, but said with a little training it should even itself out. In the meantime, my unemployment was running out, and I had to go out and start looking for a job. It is amazing how many jobs out there require you to speak. My parents refused to let me go back into the construction industry, so I ended up working at Sizzler as a cook. Choir practice was 3 times a week and my voice started to level out. Unfortunately, it leveled out in a very awkward place. I was soon sounding like a teenage girl. But it was also developing into a smooth, pure voice. The choir leader had me singing on the women's side of the choir. At first way in the back so my squeaky voice wouldn't detract from the rest of the choir, but as my voice developed and got stronger, he moved me closer and closer to the front of the choir. After only 2 months he had me on the front row with his best soloists. Again we contacted the doctor and asked about where my voice was going. He said he understood our concern, but there was little he could do. They repaired my voice with what was left after the accident, and unfortunately this is the result. Short of some major elective surgery, expensive elective surgery, this was something I would just have to come to terms with. And so, knowing my voice was what it was, and there was little I could do to change things, all I could do was to make the best of it and move on with life. I continued with the choir. As my voice developed and grew stronger, the rest of the choir started to embrace me as one of their own, instead of just a visitor. The choir leader wanted to showcase my voice, but held back because it would be awkward to have a guy up front singing with the voice of Mariah Carey. Okay, I wasn't that good, but you get the picture. I found my voice was giving me problems too. Sizzler was a decent job, but it just didn't pay really well. Unfortunately, as I was looking for a job, I kept stumbling over my voice. Nobody wanted a guy with a woman's voice, or at least no place that paid better than Sizzler. I was at an impasse, and hoped something would eventually pop. The choir leader finally got his wish to allow me to solo though. In a way. In September, the church decided to put together a CD of Christmas songs to be given out as gifts during the Christmas season. The CD would be 12 songs total, and I would solo 2 of them and sing lead on 2 others. I have to say I was thrilled. With all that had gone on in my life the last year, life had become difficult. The one thing I found that really lifted my spirits was my singing. I was really starting to enjoy it a whole lot. and to be allowed to sing lead on 4 songs on the Christmas CD was a huge compliment in my book. There was one girl in the choir that I was beginning to really like, and in the second week of November I finally got up the courage to ask her out. Her name was Christy, and she said yes. In the coming weeks we started seeing more of each other both in and out of choir practice. 1 month later the CD was a big hit for Christmas. But then again, anything free usually is. The church said they would take contributions to defray the cost of the CD, and they were not disappointed by the response. After the holidays, life settled back down to a routine, still making no headway on the job front, so I remained a cook at Sizzler. I was slowly saving money for college, but at this pace it would be a few years before I had any chance at affording college. Christy and I were officially dating by this point, and we were still in the church choir. Although, I have to admit, I always felt I sang just a bit better with Christy standing right beside me. On the first day of February we were practicing with the choir as usual when a man walked into the church. He asked the choir director if it would be possible to meet the young lady on the CD he was holding. The director asked him to be more specific since there were several singers on that particular CD. The gentleman indicated 4 songs on the CD. The choir director then motioned for me to step down and join them. The gentleman asked if this was some kind of joke, but was assured it was not. I was then asked to sing one of the solos I had for the Christmas CD, and this guy's jaw hit the floor. Once he was convinced it was my voice he was looking for, he said he was at a bit of a loss. He said he had connections with a major pop music recording label, and through some means or another had gotten their hands on our Christmas CD. To say they were blown away by the voice on the CD was an understatement, and he had come down here to see if he could get her to go with him to LA and cut some demo tracks. But as I had found out in the job market, the voice had to match the face. He said he loved the voice, but he wasn't sure they would sell any CDs if my face was on the album cover, much less fill up seats for a concert. I laughed and said that it worked for Michael Jackson. He laughed in response, but said he wasn't sure his label wanted to take such a risk. He would have to go back to LA and have the execs reevaluate their options. He asked for my phone number, then thanked us for our time and turned and left the church. I was certain that just like many other prospective employers in recent months, I would never hear back from him. I was wrong. 2 weeks later he called back. He said that the studio executives still wanted me to come in and do a demo album for them. He said they wanted to get me on a flight to LA as soon as I could fit it into my schedule. I told them my schedule was surprisingly open at the moment, and I could be in LA in a day or 2. I asked him if they could reserve 2 seats though so I could bring Christy with. I always sing better when she is beside me, and would reimburse them for her ticket. They said they would happily pay for Christy to join me, and they looked forward to seeing both of us in a few days. 2 days later Christy and I found ourselves in LA standing in a huge lobby with pictures of famous song artists and gold and platinum albums lining the walls. We walked up to the front desk and I told the receptionist my name and that I had an appointment. She confirmed that I did, and had me escorted upstairs to the office of David Weimer, who just happened to be the gentleman who had visited us about a week earlier. He said he had a recording studio reserved for us for the next 2 days. He then showed me a list of some well-known songs as well as 2 I had never heard of before. He asked me if I would be comfortable singing a few of these songs. Looking over the list, I found several songs I was familiar with and that with a little practice should be able to sing. He asked if I could get 5 done in the next 2 days. I told him I would do my best. He then turned my attention to the 2 unknown songs. He said that they were songs never before released, and to make sure these were 2 of the songs I recorded. He said they were important because the execs wanted to evaluate my voice on its own merit and not be compared to another artist or previously released song. I told him I would make sure these 2 songs were on the demo. He showed us to a studio and introduced us to a gentleman who would help me put together my demo tracks. He said he had worked with many famous artists and would be more than happy to help me out. I had never been in a real studio before, so he showed me around a bit and made me feel comfortable. He said the first thing he wanted to do was a sound check. He told me to sing anything I wanted so he could get everything tuned into my voice. As he sat behind his console and Christy beside me for support, I stepped up to the microphone and belted out the first song that I could think of. The Star-Spangled Banner. He said for a first song he was quite impressed. He said he never expected such a beautiful voice come from behind a face like mine, no offense intended. I told him I heard that a lot and that I was not offended. He then said that was a better rendition than he thought he had ever heard at any sporting event. Again, I thanked him for the compliment. We then got down to business. Between him, me, and Christy, we came up with 3 songs that I was confident I could sing well, and that he felt would best show off my abilities, plus the 2 that David wanted us to record, for a total of 5 songs. With his help and a lot of editing and retakes, we had a demo CD put together in our 2-day limit that we were happy with. Back in David's office, he sat there holding the CD in his hand and said that the decision makers would be very interested in what we put on this. He then laid the CD on his desk and handed me a short stack of papers. He said it was not a recording contract, but only a release for the CD, turning over all rights to the CD and the songs on it to his recording label. He said that it was the only way the execs would allow the CD to be even listened to. If I was not willing to sign the forms, he said there would be no hard feelings, and that he would return the CD to us and wish us a safe trip home. I turned to Christy, and she just ever so lightly nodded. I signed the forms. Putting the CD in his top right drawer, David turned to Christy and me and said it may take a while to come to a determination of whether they would go forward with me. The next morning we were on a plane headed back home. I was more excited this time than the first time I had met him, and I waited anxiously for a call. In the meantime, it was back to life, with one notable exception. I asked Christy to marry me. I told her that regardless what the future held, I wanted to marry her. Happily, she said yes. 2 months later, I still had not received a call from the record label. I was beginning to feel that they had decided the risk was just way too much. But I put my concerns on the back burner for the time being. I was to be married in a little over a month. And then came one of the biggest shocks of my life. Maybe not as big of a shock as being hit in the throat with a nail, but quite a shock nonetheless. I was working the afternoon shift at Sizzler when Shelby came up to me. She was one of the waitresses there at Sizzler, but was also on the choir with Christy and me. She asked me if that was me. Confused, I asked her what she was talking about. She went over to a radio sitting on a shelf and turned it up. I rarely heard it over the sounds of the steaks grilling. But as she turned up the radio, I heard the final verses of a familiar song called "In Love's Embrace." It was a song that nobody had ever heard before, a song that I had recorded in a record studio a little over 2 months earlier. I was in such a state of shock that I dropped somebody's steak medium rare on the ground. When the song was finished, the DJ came on and said that the song had only recently been released but has already gained a strong following. The record company would not release the name and details of the singer, and when pressed, they said it would have to remain a mystery for the time being. I contacted Mr. Weimer at the record label to ask what exactly was going on. He told me the execs still hadn't come to a final decision. I asked him what's with my song being on the radio then. He said they were testing the waters, and that a good or bad public response may be what sways the decision-making process one way or another. I asked, since my song was on the radio, would I be seeing some profit from it? He said unfortunately no, because I signed away rights to it. But if the execs did decide to sign me to a contract, I could expect a nice payday in coming months. He then reiterated that he would be in touch, said he had to be in a meeting, and ended the call. I talked to Christy about the phone call, and she said not to worry about it. What goes around comes around. When they finally pull their heads out of the sand long enough to call you and offer you a deal, you just tell them you want to think about it and hang up on them. Christy was the rock I had learned to lean on. I especially liked the fact that she said when and not if. She could also be sly and devious. I was glad she was on my side. We watched my song rise steadily on the charts. Originally it was being called The Song by a Mystery Singer, but eventually they were calling it The Song by the Singer Mystery. The third week of June turned out to be a milestone on many fronts. I started the week by marrying the woman I had come to love and trust. At the reception we danced our first dance to In Love's Embrace, which had become our song for several reasons I am sure you can figure out on your own. That was also the week that In Love's Embrace hit #1 on the pop charts. And lastly, I got a phone call. As Christy had said, they finally were offering me a deal. And following her advice, I thanked them and told them I would have to consider their offer, and I terminated the call. 2 days later they called back. Christy took the call and told them she was now acting as my agent, and all discussions would be going through her. She then proceeded to lay her cards on the table. She said that once we started receiving royalties for the song that was currently on the radio, we would be happy to come to LA and negotiate a deal for more songs. You make money, we make money. That's the way it works. She was always polite with them, but let them know she would not allow me or us to be used as pawns, and walked all over. She ended the call by saying that we look forward to working with them very soon, and once again terminated the call. I felt she was pushing things a little too far and messing with a good thing. She said that I had a beautiful voice. I knew it, she knew it, and the public knew it, which would make the execs want me even more. She said, "Trust me, they will come around." 4 days later I got a check in the mail for $137,000. I was so glad I married that woman. That evening Christy called David and told him we would see him in LA the following Monday. By the time we got to LA, Christy had developed a nice little plan, not demands, just a plan she hoped the studio execs would go along with. When we got to David's office, she was ready to lay all her cards on the table. David spoke first and said that his superiors had decided that my voice was making them money and had the potential to make them a lot more. Therefore, David was ordered to find a workaround. Christy told him that she thought she had just the workaround he was looking for. She said that I should cut a complete album as soon as possible, but not go on tour. The public heard a girl's voice, and would get a girl, kind of. Christy and I had agreed that I would start taking hormones, at the studio's expense of course, and wait about a year for them to start taking effect. In the meantime, the studio could release a new song every few months to keep the public's interest up, but keep telling them the singer would remain a mystery. Finally, when everyone agreed I could pass as a girl, I would finally go on tour. David just loved the idea. He said he was working on a similar idea, but decided that Christy's plan was much better. After hammering out some of the finer points of the deal, he finally had a contract worked up and was ready for a signature. In the days it took to fine-tune the contract, Christy and I had gone out and found ourselves a good lawyer. After he reviewed the contract, he determined that it was in our best interest, and we would be making a lot of money in the very near future. We stayed in LA for the next month to start putting together an album. Actually, the first thing I did was to get started on female hormones. It would take a long time for any changes to show, so we had to start immediately. We got started on the album as soon as we could. The studio had a large selection of songs to choose from for our first album. They had several that they said they wanted on the album, but as per the contract Christy had a hand in putting together, she retained a lot of creative control. Within about 2 weeks she had decided on 14 songs that she thought would work well. Luckily, several of them were the ones the studio had wanted as well. I found myself laughing. I was standing in the background for the most part while Christy was doing all the work. I almost felt as if I wasn't needed at all. Then I remembered, oh yeah, I needed to sing the songs. Finally we got to the studio and started putting together our first album. Christy had picked out 14 songs, but we would only be putting 10 on the album. Having a few extra allowed us a little play to see which ones sounded the best, and put together a really good first album. After 3 weeks in the studio, we were finally done, and Christy and I packed up our things and headed back up to Seattle. I quit Sizzler, but stayed in the choir to keep my voice in shape. Over the next several months Christy and I were to just sit back and let the hormones happen. In the meantime I started to learn the fine points of presenting myself as a girl. Makeup, clothes, shoes, hair, habits, the whole gambit. Christy was determined that when the world saw me, nobody would question whether or not I was a girl. We visited Los Angeles about once a month to check in with the studio, show that their investment was in fact making progress. And some days David would fly out to Seattle as well. Everyone agreed that I was progressing faster than expected, and at the rate I was going, I might be able to make a New Year's appearance. The studio was releasing my songs at a steady pace as well. As one song was coming down the charts, they would release a new one to start climbing. As you know, In Love's Embrace hit #1 on the charts, and stayed there for 4 weeks. My second song, Of Guns and Music, also hit #1, but only stayed there for 2 weeks. My third song, Walking the Bridge, debuted at #1 and just stayed there. Mystery was gaining quite a following. The paparazzi were going nuts and harassing the studio, but they were not budging. We were told there was $1 million bounty for the first photographer to produce a verifiable photo of Mystery. We were afraid that somebody in the church might talk, but nobody did. They were a really good group of people. Around town I maintained as low of a profile as I could so nobody would realize it was me as well. Although we lived in a tight-knit community, and those who knew the truth were keeping it hush-hush, we knew it was only a matter of time before something leaked out. Finally in November it was decided that we would try a real-world test. Christy, her brother, and I would go on vacation to Disneyland in Florida. For days, and I was to be en femme the whole time. The studio also sent people to mingle with the crowd to watch their reactions and my mannerisms. I pretended Danny, Christy's brother, was my date, and really acted the girl part. We went on all the rides, chatted with people in line, I even used the girls' restroom when I had to go. I interacted with the public in every way I could while trying not to give away my voice. Without giving away who I was, I had to be a convincing girl in every way. A week after we got back to Seattle we got word back from the studio that everything was a go, and they had even booked my first gig. I had to laugh when they told me what it was. The very first song I had sung for the studio was the Star-Spangled Banner. As it turned out, that would be the first song I would sing in front of a live audience. At the Super Bowl. Well, from there, my career just took off. I was a big hit at the Super Bowl, and it was announced in a commercial during the game that Mystery would be going on tour beginning in June. Once the cities were announced, the tickets sold out in record time. Just the other day during rehearsals, I just stood there on stage looking out over an empty stadium and wondering how much my life had changed in just over a year, from devastating injury to a near overnight singing sensation. Standing there in a blouse and jeans, I looked, sounded, acted, and was treated like any other girl, even though underneath, I was still a man where it counted. Although, with all the hormones and physical changes and training, I would actually be hard-pressed to pass as a guy these days. I am married to the most wonderful woman who loves, understands, and supports me in every way. Our marriage remains a secret for a couple reasons. First off, a single star is more popular than a married one, and second, even though there have been great strides in gender acceptance, if people thought I was a woman married to another woman, ticket sales would definitely take a hit. We are able to stay close because everyone believes she is just my business manager. Nobody needs to know more. Will I ever take the final step and become a complete female? I doubt it. Just like the name that the whole world now knows me as, most of the truth about my life will just have to remain a mystery.